You're listening to Righteous Humanist, the podcast where we analyze religious language, metaphors, and other expressions, and their implications to society. I'm your host, Steve Martin. Let's get righteous. Hello, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to episode 3 of the Righteous Humanist podcast. In the last couple of episodes, I set up what would be the basis of the principles why I would be doing this podcast. But in case you didn't tune into those episodes yet, and I do encourage you to go back to episodes 1 and 2 and do so, I'll fill you in a little bit about what my plan is for today's episode. Today we're going to examine the words faith and belief. I chose these two concepts because I believe they're just so prevalent and important to understand. So I think that they illustrate nicely many of the arguments that I'm trying to make when I'm talking about analyzing religious language. And those three arguments, if you hadn't listened to the first episode, go as follows. So my argument is that the prevalence of religious language, regardless of one's actual belief system in the United States, actually has three somewhat negative outcomes. The first is that persistent and consistent, ubiquitous use of religious types of language and phrases really normalizes religion in our society and in our culture. And what I mean by that is that it's sort of think of it as an assumption that everybody is religious, and that people are very surprised to find out if someone says, I don't believe that, or I don't have any religion, I'm an atheist, I'm a humanist, or whatever other term that they might use. If you yourself are an atheist, you've probably experienced this quite a bit if you're willing enough and bold enough to actually admit publicly that you're a non-believer, that people are often surprised or shocked to find that out. And so that's the opposite of being normalized, right? So if theism, if being religious, and of course in the United States, that primarily means Christian, although of course we are becoming more diverse. There are certainly more religions that are being acknowledged and accepted and so forth. But that aside, the idea is that religion, any religion, is considered normal, and being an atheist is completely aberrant, completely abnormal. It completely shocks people. And so that's the first thing that religious language, the prevalence of it, really achieves in society, is that it normalizes religion. And the word faith is going to be important to this one in a couple of minutes here when I get to that part. So hold on to that. The second one, and these sort of build upon one another, the second one is that the frequent use of religious expressions and idioms and metaphors and language in society often works, again, I would say in a mostly a negative way, to remove human agency from many situations. And so what I mean by that is the phrases tend to encourage a mindset that you as a human, or humans in general, have little or even no control over situations because it's all a matter of fate, or in this case, some higher power is in control, right? So a lot of the language that gets used ultimately encourages a frame of mind or a way of thinking that discourages many people from believing that they themselves or other humans or just humanity more broadly has much or any control over the world around us and that what happens around us. So that I believe is also very dangerous. Today's concepts won't have quite as much to do with that, although belief will have some role in that, especially as I'll use some examples in a sports context. And third and finally, and I think perhaps most dangerous, and boy are we ever seeing this play out right now, is that this religious thinking that is encouraged and spurred on and spawned on by a lot of these religious uses of language and metaphors and expressions is really harming our ability as a whole, as a nation, to get a critical enough of a mass of people to understand critical thinking and scientific methodologies and what's true from what's false and so forth. And the word belief, of course, here has a large role in this and is somewhat of a culprit in the matter. So let's start out today. That's the setup. Let's start out by first examining the I guess, sort of dictionary or the denotative definitions and etymologies of the words faith and belief. And then we'll take a look at and talk about a little bit what their sort of connotative meanings are. And that's going to vary person by person. So largely that's going to be my own subjective analysis of what those words mean. And you may be listening to that part and disagreeing with some of it, and that's perfectly fine. I would expect that. And then after that, we'll take a look at a couple of examples of each of the words faith and belief or believe in some specific context that I've been analyzing and thinking about quite a bit. So, okay, first, the etymology, what's the origin of the word faith and what does it mean? Now, I'm admittedly not a linguist, but I do know how to look these things up and analyze them a little bit critically here. So the word faith is actually derived from the Latin word fides, which would have translated roughly, and see, this is where you can get into some debate, because when you're translating languages, they don't always translate perfectly, because that's kind of the problem with translation, right? So the word would have meant something along the lines of having trust, trusting someone, or having confidence in someone. So in that sense, the etymology of the word, I think, is perfectly reasonable. And I think that to use the word in that context, if we were to say that we have faith in somebody, we probably mean that we trust them or that we have confidence in them. And you'll hear people say that all the time. I say it all the time. You say, oh, I have faith in humanity. Oh, I have faith in you. I have faith you'll get it done. I have faith that you'll do the right thing, or whatever. Because of the fact that the word faith, I believe, is so strongly correlated with religion lately, I've been trying to use the word faith a lot less, actually, and I try to say confidence or trust, because I think that conveys what I am trying to say to people a little bit more, because it means that based upon their past, based upon what I know about them, based upon some kind of evidence, I do have confidence in them, or I do trust them. I typically don't say I trust somebody who I've never met before. I suppose you could do that. I typically don't have confidence in people that I've never met before. So to me, in this context, it means that there's got to be some evidence for it. And the notion of evidence, of course, is going to become incredibly important throughout this discussion. So I think what's happened, though, now is that the term faith doesn't really have a direct relation to its original etymology, because over the centuries, it became largely synonymous with religion. So let's look at belief. Well, belief, this is kind of a tough one, actually. What does it really actually mean? And something interesting you'll find if you look at a lot of dictionaries, they'll define faith with the word belief and the word belief with the word faith. So they kind of get used circularly with each other, or as synonyms almost for each other, as another word to use to define it. So you say, oh, what's faith? Well, faith is a belief. What's belief? Well, belief is faith that something's true. And so you find this kind of circular relationship in a lot of dictionaries when you look these words up in that sense of the word, and how you look at it as a dictionary definition. But belief is sometimes defined as, and these are two very different things, but the word can mean either of these. So it might mean an opinion. So you'll see sometimes in a dictionary that a belief is an opinion, which of course may or may not be based on evidence at all of any kind. But you'll also see it defined as someone holding a conviction. And so to me, that's much stronger than an opinion, right? If you're convinced, if it's a conviction, that's a much stronger term than to just say that it's an opinion about something. So I think that the words, words have dictionary definitions, but are those any more or less authoritative or true or correct than the other ways that we might use and try to use particular words? I mean, not necessarily. Is a dictionary the final say? I guess so to some extent, but that's not the way language works either. That's not the way we use it in our everyday lives. How many people go around correcting you by pulling out the Oxford English Dictionary and so forth? And of course, if somebody does that, then they immediately get called pedantic and so forth. So those are what the words mean. And belief is kind of interesting. The German word, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce because German's way outside of my language specialty, but the German word is sort of the same word for both faith and belief. And so what you can see is that even in some languages, and I'm sure someone who speaks German can explain, might be able to email me and explain to me why I've got this wrong. I'm not sure. But when I looked it up in some other languages, the German word was pretty consistently used to mean both faith and belief. So some languages seem to think of them so similarly that they only have one word that kind of translates to both if you translate it to English. So I'd be really interested. Please take a look at my website and email me at righteoushumanist@gmail.com if you speak German and know a lot more about that than I do. I would love to incorporate that into future episodes. So they are often used to define one another. They get conflated. They become sort of synonymous, the word faith and belief. I also put the word believes in here as the sort of a belief is the noun, believes is sort of the verb form of that is how I would think of it. So I'd like to move into some of the ways that I think the word faith is often used currently and why, to me, it really has almost exclusively a religious dimension to it or a religious connotation to it. So that I don't really think of it so much in terms of perhaps what its original etymological meaning was in terms of trust or confidence. And in fact, like many terms, and we'll talk about them, righteous being one of them, of course, that I've talked about right away in episode 1, and of course is on the website and on the blog, is that the word faith, I think, is become exclusively religious. So much so that, in fact, when most people think of the word faith, it's actually more like a noun, as in what's your faith, and faith in that sense is what's your religious affiliation. So religion, a particular religion, is a faith. Islam is a faith. Buddhism is a faith. Any given religion is a faith. So it's become synonymous almost with saying what's your religion, and we see this in quite a few different places. So I'll give you an example. I was a few years ago applying for, I won't say the name of the institution, but I was applying for a position at a institution of higher education that on its website, and it is a religiously based private college. So that's important context here as well. And of course, all over the website, there are statements that say things like, we welcome, students, faculty, and staff of all faiths. We, in fact, we have over 27 different faiths represented on our campus in the student body, and so forth and so on. And they very prominently and proudly talk about how they believe it's important to have a diversity of faiths. And this got me to thinking, as an atheist, I wonder if they're as welcoming of people of with no faith, with that don't think of things in that way at all, with no particular supernatural beliefs or religious convictions or anything of the sort. And I don't know the answer to that question, but the statements seemed to exclude it. And so there is, again, I believe, an example of how this concept sort of normalizes religion. And, I guess maybe not all religions are theistic, so I wouldn't want to say theism as well. Although, again, when you look at the dominant numbers of who practices which religions, you quickly see that overwhelming majority of persons in the country are one of the three Abrahamic religions, of course, so Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. So it would seem to go hand in hand with quite a bit of that. And I was thinking of another example the other day following something tragic, some kind of a tragedy. There will be calls for interfaith vigils. And this, again, would seem to imply that something like a vigil, like the mourning of a tragic death or a school shooting or something like that, is only in the purview of those who have a faith, who practice some kind of a faith, of a religion. And so the word faith here, again, has in large part become synonymous with religion. Faith of faith is a religion, and then therefore the word faith often connotes that same type of thinking when people say the word faith. A church next to my college campus has a sign that points to an interfaith chapel. And so again, I wonder if, I think they would, they're very nice people. I'm sure they wouldn't kick out an atheist, but it doesn't seem to invite an atheist either. And I think that's kind of the point about how it normalizes religion. I've never seen yet anything that says, I think, perhaps, how would we solve this? I mean, I don't have a great answer for a lot of this, and it's not in my realm necessarily to come up with different terms, although sometimes I think of these. Would interbelief be a better word, or something along those lines? Or I'm not really sure. Maybe if you have ideas, again, email me. Email me your ideas about how we could say interfaith without using the word faith. It's kind of a tricky one. So it, again, normalizes the fact that the majority of people, and which is true, they are, that the majority of people are religious. But even if that's the case, it doesn't mean that all others should feel excluded from such spaces and from such events. And I'm not suggesting that atheists are a sensitive lot in that particular kind of a way, but it's still something that I think is good. It's important to think about that. How does our language, how are the terms we use exclusionary, even if unintentionally? It's something I think we can consider for sure. So let's take a look. Let's shift gears a little bit and take an examination of the word belief and believes. Now, I didn't really think of the word belief as particularly religious when I first began doing some of this analysis. But the more that I've analyzed it, the more I consider it, the more it seems like it has been something that, and again, I'm not saying there's any intention behind this, but it has been sort of hijacked by religion, in the sense that it's a word that is used a lot in the religious context, and then it becomes almost, again, synonymous with that. And I think it has other meanings as well. A dictionary definition of belief is pretty hard to get to. Again, I looked it up and it said things like a conviction or an opinion, a pretty wide range of ideas here, pretty wide range of options. Some dictionaries just make it synonymous with the word faith and so on. So I started thinking a lot more about this word and looking it up, and it occurred to me that often when I go into a business, for example, or in my case, I went into the dental office, or some of my friends' homes, and I never realized it, but the word believe is really quite a prominent and common and popular word to have on display objects in one's home or in one's place of business. So my dental office has the word believe in this really cool, it's actually quite a nice piece of art. Actually, I like the aesthetics of it. It's sort of a stainless steel cursive word believe. And I forget what there's a couple of other words there too, but the word believe is on that. Or one of my friends' homes, I'm thinking of a very nicely carved, wooden, engraved, wall plaque that says believe, and it's really nice. It's a good looking piece of art. So I did a search on Hobby Lobby's website. I just Googled that went on their online store, and I Googled the word believe in their particular search engine, and over 85 different products came up at Hobby Lobby that had the word believe in it. Most of them, that's all it was. It was a coffee cup with the word believe on it, throw pillow for your couch with the word believe on it, lots of wall art, clocks, all kinds of things, you name it. And then I recalled that Hobby Lobby is a fairly strongly associated business with the Christian right. Hobby Lobby, as you may know, won a court case that argued that they shouldn't have to pay for their female employees' birth control via the health insurance plan as the Affordable Care Act mandated. And Hobby Lobby won that case, and the Supreme Court said that you can't make a family, and they claim that they're a family-owned business still. You can't have somebody paying for something or funding something or supporting something that goes against Supreme Court's exact words, sincerely held beliefs. And that's what really got me thinking about this word belief and believes, because I find this really troublesome and problematic. So now anybody can just say, oh, well, it's my sincerely held belief that, aliens abducted me, and therefore that I have a disability, and you have to, whatever. I mean, come up with your craziest, most ludicrous example you can think of. And you can say, well, you can't force me to do that or not do that because it's a sincerely held belief that I hold. And I just find this a dangerous slippery slope to go down, and how it happened because of religion. I don't see another explanation for it, and that's part of what I'm talking about here. So it has somewhat of the notion of not only normalizing religious thinking here now, but also of removing some human agency from some situations. And as we'll see in a bit, also really reducing Americans' ability to think critically about very important things. So I've become increasingly troubled also by the word belief, which I previously hadn't really thought of much in a religious context or as being a problematic term or a word, but it's gotten entangled with faith, and it's gotten entangled with, in particular in the United States, with the religious rights agenda to, in the name of religious freedom, actually discriminate in a lot of cases against people who don't share the same beliefs as they do. I also started thinking about the word in a different context, and I'm thinking of a lot of sports fans out there. We're going to miss sports this fall. I realize that. And I think, you see a lot of teams, and the word believe is kind of interesting because I think in the sports context, the word believe often seems to be more synonymous with hope, which I guess hope is also close to faith in the sense that you're hoping it's true or hoping it will become true, even though you don't have any good reason to believe it'll be true. It reminds me of the way that Mark Twain defined faith, right? Faith is believe in what you know ain't so, or something like that, he said. And believe, so you'll see and it's always teams who are, have a losing record, right? Or have a long losing streak, whether that's that season or over a history of time. And someone will be holding up a sign and the camera will zoom in on it and it'll say, believe. And of course, what those fans are saying is, even though that certainly doesn't look like we're going to make the playoffs and definitely can't win the Super Bowl or the championship, I still have faith that despite all the contradicting evidence, that we'll somehow pull this out. So I thought of it in a sports context, and it almost does have a similar idea to the word faith, which, if you think of faith as something that someone believes in the absence or even in the face of contradictory evidence, then the word believe in the sports context is also quite similar and has become similar in that way. There was even a documentary about the Chicago Cubs that was, I think it came out in 2009, which was 7 years before they won the World Series. And of course, the Cubs had long been, cursed sports teams who don't win championships for a long time, for 50, 60, 100 years, are cursed. So here we have an example of, with the believe and the curse and the faith, where this type of mentality that the language encourages, in fact, actually removes a lot of agency of humans. It's like, well, even though the players aren't that good and the coaching staff isn't that great and we don't have the talent that we need and we have a losing record, I still have faith that we're going to make the playoffs. That's just kind of magical thinking, right? And so it encourages this magical thinking. We see that a lot in the sports world. Sports, in some ways, you might argue, are a little bit like a religion. People get pretty fanatical about it, pretty zealous about it, and so there is some similarities there in our mentality, and perhaps we could see some crossover of language there as well. So I think that is one way that it can remove human agency to some extent, is if we say, well, I have faith that this will just fix itself, or if something goes wrong, it's just, we're cursed. It's not our fault. It's not because we didn't manage a salary cap properly and didn't draft the right players. It's a curse. It's a curse that we aren't a winning team for 100 years and so forth. And then I started thinking about, how do you make the argument? Because I see this happen a lot. You'll see people who just simply refuse to acknowledge scientific facts. And it's a frustrating sort of a personality and person to attempt to have a intellectually honest, legitimate conversation with them, because they simply refuse to believe that which is scientifically proven, factual, just incontrovertible. There's no way you could say you believe it or not. It's just, it is or it isn't. It's not a matter of belief. And that got me thinking about evolution as a concept quite a bit. I started to try to figure out where all this happens. And if you look at a public opinion polling, for example, Gallup poll actually frames the question as a matter of belief. And I think so. This is incredibly problematic. Before you even get a shot at talking about the science behind it, Gallup poll will say, this is the way they actually, I have the exact words here that are really important. Gallup poll, this is the way they've asked the question for quite some time. Do you personally believe, there it is, they use the word believe. And of course, when you ask it as a question, you're inviting a no as an answer. Do you personally believe in the theory of evolution? Do you not believe in the theory of evolution? Or do you not have an opinion either way? And so there they just sort of equated belief with opinion, which is not altogether wrong. Granted, I get that, because one dictionary definition of believe, as we covered already, is that it's an opinion. And so denotatively, at least, they're not misusing the term. However, my issue with this is that Gallup poll framed the question as one of belief, which it's not, right? It's not. It doesn't matter if you believe evolution or not. Evolution is true regardless of whether or not someone sincerely believes it is or isn't, and this can work in both directions too. It doesn't have to be believing in something; it could be not believing in something as well. But my concern here is that even by framing this question in this way, largely scientists lose the argument before they ever have a chance to win it, I guess is the way that I would put this. You just framed it as a question of belief by the way the question was worded. And so what Gallup is doing, unwittingly, I don't think they're doing this on purpose, of course, but what these public opinion polling firms are doing is they're actually bolstering a belief, a belief that it's not true, and they're giving credence, they're giving credibility to the religious thinking on a matter that's got nothing to do with religious beliefs. And so it's really scientifically dangerous, I believe. And I think we're seeing this play out quite a bit. It's not incidental that we have such a profound scientific illiteracy going on in our country right now. There's just so many people who they'll just say, "Oh, I don't believe that," and just completely dismiss it. You look on social media right now about masks and coronavirus, or just coronavirus in general. Set aside the effectiveness of mask question for a minute, and people will just say things like, I just don't believe it." That's great. I wish I could just not believe in a virus, not believe in the harmfulness of a virus, and then it wouldn't hurt me either. But that's just not the way a virus works, and that's not the way science works. And so we have seen this over time, I believe, accrual of all of these things. This is why when people say to me, what are you making such a big deal out of language and words for? They're just words. Stop getting all bent out of shape. It's just a word. Well, nothing is just a word. This is something I talked about in episode 1. It's not just a word. Words matter. Language matters. Language affects the ways we think. It encourages us to think in certain ways. It limits us from thinking in other certain ways, and it does matter. Of course it matters. If it didn't matter, political parties wouldn't pay millions and millions of dollars to have people come up with the right words to use for their messages. They know it matters, and they spend millions to make sure that they get it right. And of course, words matter. Words matter big time. And so I remember many years ago reading some of these kind of just crazy, absurd comments about a Miss USA contest. And so I had a little something that I wrote up a while back called Misunderstanding Evolution. And so one of the questions was very similar to the Gallup poll, right? It was, well, actually it was a little bit better than this. It wasn't about belief, although every single answer by every contestant used the word believe in it in some way. But this was back in 2011, so it's not that new, but I suspect that the results in 2020 or 2021 will be almost identical to this. The Miss USA pageant contestants were asked, should evolution be taught in schools? And oh, wow. If you've never seen these, go on YouTube and look some of these up, and you can see them in their entirety. I transcribed all of them painfully, very painfully. And even the so-called good answers really weren't that good, in the sense that they really didn't demonstrate, an understanding of exactly, first of all, what evolution is, and whether or not it doesn't really classify as a belief. But almost every single contestant said that a lot of them said they wouldn't. Shouldn't be taught in school because I don't believe it. The answers were sort of like, I don't believe it, or we should let kids. Some of them were like, oh, we should let kids decide what they want to believe. Oh man, so this is, the only analogy that I can come up with here to illustrate the absurdity of an answer like that is ask the same thing but replace it with gravity. Should the theory of gravity be taught in physics classes or in school? And can you just imagine a beauty pageant or a Miss America, Miss USA contestant saying, I think we should let kids decide what they want to believe about gravity or not. And I think if you replace evolution with gravity, which is a very fair thing to replace, by the way, because we have every bit as much evidence that proves evolution as we do that proves gravity. They're not theories as in guesses. They're scientific theories, which is very different. Of course, a lot of this stuff, the word belief, the way we misuse it, the way that people use it, has cast all this doubt on science, and it has made a lot of Americans completely misunderstand science just in general, misunderstand the scientific method. They certainly don't know what a scientific theory is. They're using the word theory synonymously with like the word hypothesis, actually, or a guess. Whereas, of course, a theory is much, much, much stronger than that. We've never, I always tell people, if you can disprove evolution, by all means, write that thing up, submit it to every scientific publication you can, and collect your Nobel Prize in science for disproving one of the most foundational, fundamental theories of biological sciences that we've ever figured out, evolution. But it's amazing how just this word belief and believes has been able to cast so much doubt on it for so many people. It's really similar to climate change and climate science denialists and so forth. I firmly believe that the use of the word faith and belief interchangeably, synonymously, and in some ways really upholding them as positive things has contributed to a lot of scientific misunderstanding and a lot of missed opportunities in trying to educate the public about some of the basics of science that we really need to be worrying about. It's astounding how many people just really don't even know what the theory of evolution actually claims, right? If you really start to ask them about it, and this is one way that I have dealt with a few folks like this on those occasions where I've decided it was worth conversing with them, and I would say, if they say I don't believe in evolution, or I don't believe evolution, say, instead of challenging them on that, because then it's just an opinion, right? Because that's what belief means to them in some ways, just a religious opinion, or even evolution is just another religion. I've even heard people say that about environmentalism when talking about climate change. Wow, environmentalism is just another religion. And so when religion is normalized, then even these scientifically held positions that are evidence-based, grounded in reason, grounded in science, to some religious people, they'll just dismiss it as just another faith, or just another religion, or just another belief. And I think that's where there's just so much danger in the way that we frame this language this way. And so what I think works, if I'm trying to come up with solutions, if you're the type of person who wants to engage and have a conversation with someone who says, I don't believe in evolution, or I don't believe in climate change, or I don't believe in vaccinations, or whatever the case might be, that's something that's not scientifically sound. Well, this works probably with evolution better. It might not work quite as well with some other examples, but say, well, what do you think the theory of evolution actually claims? And a lot of the time that'll get you into a more productive conversation than to argue about beliefs or not. And then as they're trying to articulate that, then you can correct what's probably in many cases a misunderstanding of what they actually think the theory of evolution states or not. So that's one way to do it. It's kind of hard to, at this point in time, it's relatively difficult to just say, well, what you mean by belief is actually an opinion, and getting into all that's probably not going to be that productive of a conversation. But that's one way that we can think about it. So that's going to wrap up this episode. I hope I've given a sample of what some future episodes might contain. I'm going to talk about some of these word categories, a couple of key concepts, terms, metaphors, and so forth, and think about their implications. Think about societal implications. along the framework that I established. That first, a lot of these concepts really normalize religion, often specifically Christianity. And second, a lot of these terms and metaphors remove a lot of human agency from situations when in fact humans are in control of a lot of it. Yeah, everything happens. When people say something like everything happens for a reason, for example, they often mean the reason is something supernatural. And I'd like to bring that back to, yeah, and the reason was because we screwed it up. We humans screwed it up, and we also can fix it. Because we screwed it up, we can fix it. And of course, I like that framework and thinking a lot better than a supernaturalistic thinking that it's out of our control as humans. And then third and finally, I just think generally that a lot of these religious expressions have significantly reduced people's critical thinking abilities and scientific understandings of the world. And it's partly why we're in a mess about some of these types of topics today. Well, thank you for listening to episode 3 of Righteous Humanist, and stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you for listening to Righteous Humanist. Please consider visiting my website at righteoushumanist.com, finding me on various social media platforms by the same name, or visiting my Patreon page at patreon.com/righteoushumanist.